Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 10:30 p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Friday night, January 28th. I'm glad to be here. Hopefully I'm streaming okay. I've had a lot of problems with Skype and a lot of problems with Blog Talk Radio and my shows lately, but hopefully you can hear me. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and chat room is open, and I did pop the link in there to what I wanted to talk about tonight. And I thank everybody for tuning into my shows. I really appreciate it. I do so many shows during the week, and I just, I know so many people are keeping up with my shows, and I just thank you for doing that. I'm not a professional counselor or therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own Blog Talk shows, mainly to speak out against child abuse, to stand up, for child rights, to, pass the word on to other survivors to hang in there and hold on, and, just a number of reasons why I'm doing these shows. And so hopefully they're helping somebody, and hopefully they're useful to somebody. I know it's helping me out because I'm a survivor and really on my healing journey, so it does help me a lot to talk about this stuff and get this out, because I'm interested in public speaking, and will probably go on to hopefully do worldwide public speaking on the issues of child abuse and child abuse prevention. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. You have to listen to all my shows at your own discretion. I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a very sensitive subject. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable when they hear about abuse. It's not a comfortable subject. It's something I've lived with my whole life, so I'm okay talking about it. But I know a lot of people have a hard time listening to subjects about abuse. So make sure that you're safe in a safe place, that you won't hurt yourself or somebody else if you're listening to the show. Maybe being triggered by the information if you're a survivor, and also if you're a young person under the age of 18. I ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, because I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we're standing up to save children's lives. So we're all volunteers, and we're working around the clock, really, minus the time we have to sleep, to try to stop child abuse. And generally, because of all the areas that all the volunteers live in, we're kind of around the clock, So if you're a young person under the age of 18, you get the information on how to keep yourself safe online. It is so important. And, do yourself a favor and me a favor and have somebody okay it that you can listen to my shows. Just because there's a lot of adult content on my shows, sensitive material, and may not be age appropriate, so you have to get, help to make sure you're making the right decision by listening to the show, because I believe, like I said, in protecting children at all times. So do yourself a favor and me a favor and get somebody to listen to the show with you who's older, who can help you make a decision whether you really should be listening or not. So this is Child Abuse Prevention, and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is up to us. And we were talking on Wednesday night, we were looking at this website, which I want to continue looking at, causes and effects. This is from libraryindex.com, www.libraryindex.com. It's called Causes and Effects of Child Abuse, a longitudinal study of the consequences of childhood maltreatment. If you follow the links here on Library Index, on this website, you can see that they have social issues and debate topics. Then they talk about causes and effects of child abuse. And then they talk about some contributing factors to child abuse: the violent family, abusive mothers, abusive fathers, abusive siblings. That's where we left off. So now tonight I want to talk about the next article, which comes up. It's the Causes and Effects of Child Abuse, a longitudinal study of the consequences of childhood maltreatment. It's a short article, but it's important to to bring out this information and really raise awareness regarding this issue. They did a lot of studies, and this information on this website is mostly statistical, really, all about studies that they've done. But the thing is they do draw some really good attention to certain aspects of the effects of abuse and what happens to children when they have been abused and then they grow up, and the issues that surround it, adult survivors of child abuse and things that happen to children just due to the abuse that they suffered. So I just think it's important to talk about this stuff. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. We'll get right into this. I have Sandra McLeish here. Sandra McLeish is the lead volunteer coordinator for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. Hello, Sandra. And hope you're having a good night, and hopefully you have a great weekend. Thanks for being here. And she's also the Northern Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children down in the U.S. So thank you a lot for being here. I appreciate it. And so we're going to get right into this topic here. Causes and Effects of Child Abuse, a longitudinal study of the consequences of childhood maltreatment. They said one of the most detailed longitudinal studies of the consequences of childhood maltreatment involved 908 children in a metropolitan area of the Midwest who were ages 6 to 11 when they were maltreated, between 1967 and 1971. This is an old study, but I just think it's important to bring attention to what they have to say about it. A control group of 667 children with no history of childhood maltreatment was used for comparison. So they did a comparison study, and they said here each group had about 2/3 white and 1/3 African American individuals, with about the same numbers of males and females. Kathy Spatz-Whittam examined the long-term consequences of childhood maltreatment on the subject's intellectual, behavioral, social, and psychological development, and that was from childhood victimization, early adversity, later psychopathology. National Institute of Justice Journal, January 2000. So Kathy Spatz-Whittam, I've seen a lot of material by her, done a lot of work to really bring out, the real facts about childhood maltreatment and childhood abuse. Right. When the two groups were interviewed for the study, they had a median age, half were older, half were younger, of about 29 years. So they go on to talk about this. It's just a short article, but I just wanted to bring up some of the information that they talked about. Whittam found that although both abused and control groups finished an average of 11.5 years of school, less than half of the abused group finished high school, compared with 2/3 of the control group. So there was less people who had been abused who finished high school. 13% of the abused group had stable marriages, compared with nearly 20% of the control group. The abused group was also more likely to experience frequent separation and divorce. The cycle of violence. Whittam is widely known for her work on the cycle of violence, and the cycle of violence theory suggests that childhood physical abuse increases the likelihood of arrest and of committing violent crime during the victim's later years. And Whittam found that although a large proportion of maltreated children did not become juvenile delinquents or criminals, those who suffered childhood abuse or neglect were more likely than those with no reported maltreatment to be arrested as juveniles, 31.2% versus 19%, and as adults, 48.4% versus 36.2%. It's a little bit higher there for the numbers for children who had been maltreated or abused and suffered childhood abuse or neglect were more likely than those with no reported maltreatment to be arrested as juveniles and adults. The maltreated victims, 21%, were also more likely than those with no reported childhood maltreatment history, 15.6, to be arrested for a violent crime during their teen years or adulthood. So, it does. We actually study this stuff and actually, really do the research on it and read into it, and read what happens to children. They do so many studies, and especially like in prison populations where they talk to prison inmates who divulge, whether or not they had ever been abused as children. And a large number of the people in the prison system have experienced some type of abuse in their lifetime. I just know from experience myself what abuse did to me and what it did to my family, my siblings. Some of my siblings were not involved in any criminal activity. There was two of my sisters were not involved. Well, one of my sisters was partying a little bit and used to smoke pot, right? But she was not involved in any kind of theft or thieving or, any kind of criminal activity at all like that. She was what I considered to be pretty much a kid who was doing really quite well for herself. She was 5 years older than me. She's 5 years older than me. And my oldest sister, they were both not involved with drugs, with heavy drugs, not involved with, kind of criminal activity. My brothers, on the other hand, went the other way. And not all of them, but I had 4 brothers. But 3 of them really were involved in all kinds of criminal activity. And they didn't graduate high school. I was the only one in the whole family that actually graduated from high school out of 7 siblings. I was the last child born, and my mom actually said, you'll be the only one that will graduate if you do graduate. So it kind of, encouraged me to graduate. And my mom didn't care that my brothers dropped out. My parents didn't care if my brothers dropped out or died on the streets or whatever, right? I grew up in an abusive home and violent home, and my parents just were not capable of raising that many children, not even one child, let alone 7 children. So, my brothers went on to commit all kinds of crimes, not so much violent crime, mainly thefts and forgery, drug use, major drug abuse, all kinds of robberies, these types of things. But they never as far as I know, hurt anybody or were violent like towards other people. They just wanted to get what they wanted to get, so they one of my brothers would rob pharmacies, and he would rob people's homes, for the money to go get his drugs or whatever. He was a major drug addict, and I had another brother who was also a heavy duty drug addict, and they're both dead due to the drug use. And one of my brothers committed suicide. The other one died of a drug overdose at the age of 37 up here in Calgary, Alberta. And it's really sad. Their lives were pretty horrific. They lived on the streets. They were always being rolled and mugged. I don't know whether they were doing any mugging of people, but they may have. I don't know. But they themselves were mugged and rolled and beaten up, and they just were living these horrible lives on the streets here in Calgary. But even when they were growing up as teenagers, they were in a lot of trouble with the law, and the FBI was always coming around to pick them up, and they would always be hiding out, and they were told that if they committed any more crimes down in the States, they were going to be sent to Canada, because my family's all from Canada, right? We were just living in the States. I'm the only one who was born in the States and actually had the right to be there because I was a real citizen. Everybody else just had green cards, right? So I was the only American in the family, really. So my brothers were made to leave the country, actually. Two of them had to leave the country, just, otherwise they would have to do prison terms there. So they left the country and came to Canada, and then they just lived a horrible life up here, ended up in prison up here. One of my brothers did, and just horrible, what abuse. I knew how my brothers grew up. I watched how they were treated as children. We were not taught anything from our parents except for how to hate each other, how to hate them, how to hate ourselves, how to commit suicide, things like this. My parents did not teach us any useful information, right? So we had to, really, with no help, try to figure out how to live, right? And it's incredibly hard to do when you're just psychologically abused all the time, as well as physical abuse and verbal abuse, emotional abuse, that whole thing all together. It's deadly for children. It's really extremely harsh on young, teens, just getting, to the teen years, and then they grow older, and if there's no help for them, they can continue on and spiral downward, which is what my family did. That's why I'm speaking out and, really willing to talk about this stuff, and because I'm I know about this, right? Like I grew up in it, so it's harsh. I myself did a lot of drugs from the age of 12 to 21, but when I was 12 years old, I was using angel dust, PCP, and, drugs that I never should have had, never should have been able to get a hold of. But where I grew up, drugs were really easy to get and really easy to find. And, if you knew the right people, you could get what you needed. And I was quite often on the streets, just hanging around with sort of a bad crowd a lot of times. And, I loved my friends, but we were all from the same type of homes. So we were all kind of destructive to our own bodies, as well as, just not doing well. As far as young teens, we were not involved in sports, or we weren't involved in after-school activities. We were just hanging out, getting high, looking for alcohol, looking for drugs, looking for an escape, right? And so, I finally, at the age of 21, decided that I did not want to end up like my brother, who had committed suicide, who was a cocaine addict. And I thought, man, I'm going to end up just like him, because I had been using a lot of cocaine, a lot of speed, methamphetamines, and you name it, for years. And it was really starting to take a toll on my body and on the abuse that I suffered as a child really had taken its toll from the time I was born. So, I was used to feeling horrible. I didn't even know how to feel decent or feel good, whether it was physically or emotionally. I was just very sick all the time, whether physically ill, mentally ill. I was just not well as a young person. And so I finally, at the age of 21, thought, no, I need to straighten. I want to have a good life. I want to be a regular person doing regular things. I don't want to be dying in the streets here of a drug overdose, or ended up getting killed in a drug deal gone bad. I lost friends in these situations. One of my friends was gunned down in his driveway, and drug deal gone bad, and he was a nice guy, and he was just such a heavy-duty drug user. I also had another drug user friend who was told if he didn't stop what he was doing, he wouldn't live another year, and I don't know if he's alive today. I mean, I have no idea, but I watched drugs. My friends were all abused, these people that I was hanging around with, all of us, and we all came from the same kind of homes, abusive and dysfunctional. And I watched my friends go down, and I was going down with them, downhill, and we were all going downhill really fast. And I climbed out of that. I had to stop hanging around with them, and I had to change my whole life really in order to get away from that. And it's so sad because many, and actually most of my friends did not climb out with me, and I have no idea where they are today. Many of them were crackheads, just horrible existences, and I got out, right? I got out. And 20 years later, I was still looking to kill myself. I was still planning my suicides. People didn't really know because I didn't go around telling people. I had moved to Canada really with the thought in mind that I could kill myself and that I could just go away and nobody would even know. I certainly didn't want to hurt anybody, but I did want to leave this planet. And so, this is what abuse will do to people. This is what abuse will do to children, and then they have to turn into these adults who really don't know how to cope or how to even live many times. Like our parents didn't teach us how to live, they taught us how to die, right? And we were brought up told that we should have died, that we all should have died, and that both my parents were telling us on a regular basis that they should have just killed us all, or they should have killed me, right? Because my mom used to like to throw that one in there. And that or they should have killed themselves. So my parents were suicidal, and they taught us how to be suicidal. They actually offered that up as a choice for us, right? And so it's very hard to learn how to live when you were taught from 0 to whatever age that suicide's an option and that we all deserve to die because we're so bad or we're so evil or whatever, right? My parents were very sick, right? Psychologically ill, as well as just abused themselves as children and had no coping skills and were extremely highly violent, volatile, vicious people, and never should have had 7 children, right? Well, they actually had 10 or more, but only 7 of us made it. So the thing is that abuse is harsh on people, and then later on in life, all these adult survivors of this abuse and teenagers, because young teens, and then they later in life, older teens, and then they hit their 20s, they hit their 30s, and they still have to try to figure out how to heal from that, how to move in a positive direction in their life, to straighten their lives up and to try to get something back that was lost because of what somebody did to them. It wasn't lost because of something they did. You know what I mean? People will say, well, you did the drugs. It was your choice to do the drugs. Absolutely it was, but it was my choice. It was really the only way I could stay alive was to be able to escape for a while. So I was actually looking to be high all the time so that I wouldn't have to deal with the thought that I had to go home that night or the next day and deal with what was going on in my home. So I preferred to be high, right? And then at the age of 21, decided, okay, no more of this, right? I have to get my life in order. But not everybody will do that. My 2 brothers didn't, and they ended up dying, like I said, suicide and then drug overdose. Very sad. And so not every sibling in the family will go that way. Not everyone who's been abused will go that way, right? It varies. But it's interesting to note just how many do go that way. Like this study pointed out, that the control groups that they used, one group being children who had been maltreated or abused as children, and the other group with no reported maltreatment, there were so many more arrests as juveniles, so many more arrests for violent crimes as adults, right? So many more issues to deal with. And we know this because we do the studies. I mean, people have been doing the studies for years. I'm just doing the studies now. So, we're all just kind of trying to get this information out to people and get and to really start talking about this stuff, right? It's horrific. And so, it's so harsh to see what happens to children when they don't get any help, right? And so many children will not get any help, and that's the issue. Even when the authorities are involved, like in our case, the authorities were involved, and we were not removed from the home because my mom begged the courts to let us stay in the home because she didn't want to look like a bad mother. That's as much as I can figure from it. She didn't really want us, but she didn't want the courts to be looking down on her like she was this horrible mother. So she blamed everything on my dad and said, well, I love my children, don't take the children. Right? So they said, well, the only way they're going to stay in the home is if you have supervised, social workers coming in and supervising the situation to make sure you're not abusing the children. And you have to go to family counseling. You have to go for your own counseling. You both need treatment for your own psychological problems. They were both diagnosed. My dad was diagnosed borderline schizophrenic and who knows what else. My mom was diagnosed with manic depressive. And so, they both had these horrible mental issues to deal with, as well as their own pasts. They were both abused as children, and so it was just a bad mix. It was like it was like dynamite, right? They were two people that never really, they should have got themselves straightened out before they got together and got married, but they were born in the 1920s, and back then people just, I don't know, the educational levels were, the education just wasn't out there. My parents didn't, they only went to 10th grade or something, and they lived on farms with these abusive parents, and the education just wasn't there. They just thought that was life, that's the way life was, That's why my dad ended up abusing my mother, because he just figured, hey, that's what you do to women, right? And my mom abused her kids because, hey, that's what you do to kids, right? Well, my dad abused us too, but my mom was my main abuser, so it's harsh. It's so harsh, and no child should ever have to go through that, right? It's not good, because of the aftermath and the effects that these children will go through as they grow older. If they don't get any help, and slip through the cracks as usual, it's so hard on them. Right, and society does pay the price for this. You bet they do. And not only that, but we're pitching out in the United States alone. There was one stat that I saw out there was $105 billion annually because of child abuse. Not to stop child abuse or prevent it. It's just because of child abuse. $105 billion. So why not spend like $700 billion and stop child abuse? Right, with education. We got to get this next generation. We got to get the next 5 or 6 generations who are going to be the next up and coming parents who will abuse their children to make the right choice and not abuse their children and not hurt their children and not sexually use their children, right? That's the whole issue. We got to reach these younger generations who are going to be the next set of parents, because the people out here who are already abusing their children, how are you going to reach them? They're not paying attention. They're too busy abusing their children, right? And they're obviously not interested in getting help, because otherwise they would. The programs are out there. The help is pretty much in place. Sometimes you do have to make quite a few phone calls for it, and sometimes there's all kinds of stuff going on, like for instance, parental alienation and, all that kind of garbage, right? But the whole, which is just ridiculous that people do this, but they do. And the thing is that, the system is not perfect, right? So what we really need to do is focus on what's not working and then get rid of it. And then find out what is working and build on that, right? And then get, some real education out to these young people that violence is wrong, hurting people is wrong, hurting and abusing your children is wrong, sexually using your children is wrong, because a lot of these people don't realize this. We have couples, we have parents, mothers and fathers who sexually use their children and videotape it, and then trade it or do whatever they do on the internet with other child sexual predators and pedophiles, right? And this is sick and twisted, because no parent should be doing that. Nobody should be sexually using a child. But can you imagine two parents, a mother and a father, sexually using their child and videotaping it and then sending it out on? I mean, these are some sick people. And you know what? This is happening all the time. This is not uncommon. This is not something that just only happens like to one child ever. This is something that's going on all the time. And it's so wrong. It will never be right. I hope they bust every single one of those people. And that's just the way I feel about it. It's so incredibly wrong. It's against the law. And, thank God we have laws in place now that say, any abuse, all abuse is against the law. So there. And, it's absolutely ridiculous that people think that they should be allowed to sexually use their children or burn their children, beat their children, kill their children. No, it's wrong. It will never be right. And so, we'll just keep speaking out against this. That's what I'm doing. So this particular article says the author noted that the victim's later psychological disorders resulting from childhood maltreatment manifested itself in suicide attempts, antisocial personality, and alcohol abuse and or dependence. Maltreatment victims were more likely than the control individuals to have attempted suicide, 18.8% versus 7.7%. So it's really, over doubled and then some. And to have manifested an antisocial personality disorder, 18.4% versus 11.2%. And both groups, however, did not, let's see what else they have to say here. They have the actual tables here. You can check this out on this website. Did not differ much in the rates of alcohol abuse and dependence. or alcohol or drug abuse or dependence, 54.5% for the abused or neglected group, and 51% for the control group. So that was about the same. Gender played a role in the development of psychological disorders in adolescence and adulthood. Females, 24.3%, with a history of childhood maltreatment were more likely to attempt suicide compared with their male counterparts, 13.4%. A significantly larger percentage of male victims, 27%, however, than female victims, 9.8%, were at higher risk for future antisocial personality disorder, although both male maltreated 64.4% and control 67% subjects had similar proportions of alcohol abuse or dependence. And females who experienced abuse or neglect were more likely than the control group to have alcohol problems, 43.8% versus 32.8%. So, it's just higher numbers, right, for the people who were abused or maltreated as children. Cycle of violence updated. This is another phase of the cycle of violence research. Was conducted with the maltreated and control groups had a median age of 32.5 years. Aside from collecting arrest records from federal, state, and local law enforcement, the researchers also conducted interviews with the subjects. Kathy S. Whittam and Michael G. Maxfield, an update on the cycle of violence, U.S. Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice, Washington, D.C., February 2001. So that's their updated article or study. Overall, the study found that childhood abuse or neglect increased the likelihood of arrest in adolescence by 59% and in adulthood by 28%. And childhood maltreatment also increased the likelihood of committing a violent crime by 30%. So that's pretty high. And while earlier analysis of the maltreated group found that most of the victims did not become offenders, this study showed that nearly half, 49%, of the victims had experienced a non-traffic offense as teenagers or adults. Comparison by race showed that while both white and African American maltreated children had more arrests than the control group, there was no significant difference among whites in the maltreated 21.8% and control 15.2% groups. And among African American children, however, the maltreated group had higher rates of arrest. Maltreated African Americans were nearly twice as likely as their counterparts in the control group to be arrested as juveniles, 40.6% versus 20.9%. And so it's pretty harsh. It's just absolutely harsh. Whittam and Maxfield also examined the type of childhood maltreatment that might lead to violence later in life. And they found that physically abused children, 21.1%, were the most likely to commit a violent crime in their teen or adult years, closely followed by those who experienced neglect, 20.2%. Although the study showed that just 8.8% of children who had been sexually abused were arrested for violence. The researchers noted that the victims were mostly females, and females less often had a record of violent offenses. The victims of this childhood sexual abuse were mostly women, so they said females less often have a record of violent offenses. That's why. So I guess that's their reasoning for it. But men are abused sexually too. We know this. Men have been, right? And lots of men will not come forward and say that they were sexually abused. Due to the issues that surround the whole thing with the whole male psyche and what society says, that a man and a male should be. But so many men are abused. And the stats are 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused in some way under the age of 18. And so if you're in a room with 3 women, chances are, not always, but due to the statistics and the numbers out there, 1 in 3 of you would have been sexually abused in some way under the age of 18. And if you're in a room with 6 men, chances are, 1 out of those 6 men would have been abused sexually in some way under the age of 18. And I myself knew so many kids who had been sexually abused as children, and I myself am a survivor of child sexual abuse. It's absolutely ridiculous how many people have been sexually abused, and I tell you what, it's against the law, and I'm telling you, if you know a child is being abused, you have to do the right thing and make the phone call. And call the proper authorities and get that child some help. If you're standing by and you know it's happening and you're not doing anything about it, it's against the law. And if you suspect a child's being abused, do the right thing and get that child some help. Learn the signs and symptoms, learn how to report child abuse properly, and then know that you never know when a child's going to come to you and disclose that they've been abused. Many children won't. Much abuse actually goes, unknown because children do not ever tell anybody. They grow up and then they never ever disclose it to anybody. So much abuse is just not reported. And so even when it is reported, it's just not covered by the news. So there are many, many children lying around in these children's hospitals due to the abuse that they suffered that just didn't make the newspaper. I hope everybody remembers that. There's also many children who end up in body bags who were killed at the hands of their parents and caregivers or other psychotic people who get a hold of them who do not make the news reports. So everybody keep this in mind, right? Just not every case actually makes the news. And, many children are abused. The stats for physical, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse, neglect are just about the same as the sexual stats for child abuse, right? Pretty much 1 in 3 to 4 girls will be abused in some way as children, and 1 in 6 or 7 boys will be abused in some way as children. The numbers are too high. One child is too many. Let's get busy and do all we can to stop child abuse, right? If you want to get involved with Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, contact me or any Dreamcatchers for Abused Children representative. Leave a message here with me on Blog Talk Radio if you want to volunteer or you want to donate. We appreciate all your help. We appreciate your support. I appreciate your support. Thank you so much for being here and tuning into all of my shows. I just appreciate it so much. I'll be back on tomorrow. And next week, same time, same place, one child abuse survivor to another in the morning, 6 a.m. on Monday morning. And until then, take really good care of yourselves, everybody, and reach out and don't suffer in silence, Don't suffer on your own. Get some help, right? Whatever help that may be. Take care. Have a good night. Bye-bye.